It's no secret that there's a lot of Godzilla content out there. It can be pretty overwhelming to someone who's just starting to get into the franchise. How does one even begin when there are 38 films, multiple TV shows, a couple of animated movies, and multiple eras of movies that range in tone from cheesy action B movies to serious war dramas about survivor's guilt? Well, not to worry. My name's Firewolf, and this is my guide to Godzilla. The first thing to know about Godzilla is there's a lot of movies, but you already knew that. There are four distinct era of films that span over 70 years, starting in 1954 and going all the way to the current day. These four eras are known as the Showa era, the Heisei era, the Millennium era, and the Reiwa era. Each of these four separate series of Godzilla movies have their own style and flavor to them. In general, the Showa era movies tend to be the campiest and lightest in tone. The Showa era movies are the oldest films and begin with the original Godzilla movie in 1954 and end with the Terror of Mechagodzilla in 1975. Note that although most of the movies in the Showa era are pretty lighthearted and silly, that can't be said for the original Godzilla movie in 1954. Godzilla, or Gojira as it's known in Japan, is a dark and haunting movie that takes itself pretty seriously. It's an allegory for the horrors of nuclear weapons and of war. It's basically mandatory viewing for anyone who wants to get into the Godzilla franchise. If you're put off by the black and white visuals and the outdated effects, all I can say really is don't be. Godzilla is a fantastic film that deserves to be seen by anyone, and not just people who are interested in Godzilla as a franchise. Getting back to the rest of the Showa era films, like I said, they're all pretty cheesy and low-budget movies compared to the rest of the franchise. So if that's not really your thing, maybe start elsewhere. Where the Showa era movies really shine, though, is in their charm, humor, and their child-friendly and lighthearted tone. Most of the best of the Showa era movies, in my opinion, are the original Gojira, Mothra vs. Godzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Invasion of Astro Monster, sometimes also called Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, Terror of Mechagodzilla, and Godzilla Destroy All Monsters. And if you're looking for the most campy and goofiest movies in the entire franchise, I'd suggest checking out Godzilla vs. Megalon and Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which is sometimes called Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster. Next is the Heisei era. If the Showa era just looked a bit too outdated for you and cheesy, then the Heisei era might be more your speed. These movies came out from 1984 to 1995, and the Heisei movies are generally higher budget and bigger spectacle compared to the Showa era. They're a little bit more edgy and serious toned, but still have some camp in there too. It is Godzilla after all. Godzilla has a more animalistic appearance in the Heisei movies, and is a bit more of an anti-hero rather than a straight-up good guy. Some of the best of the Heisei movies include Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, Godzilla vs. Destroya, and The Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1985 as it's sometimes called. Something to keep in mind with the Heisei era movies is that they do have a continuity with each other, and because of that, there's technically an order to view them in. So if you care about the story, I'd suggest just starting with The Return of Godzilla and just watching all the Heisei movies in order until you get to Godzilla vs. Destroya, which is the last movie in the series. Again, the Heisei era movies tend to be a bit more flashy and more serious, but they still have some cheesy acting and effects and stuff like that. There aren't a whole lot of Heisei movies, so if you want to watch them all in order, then feel free. You won't regret it. The Heisei movies are my personal favorite in the franchise. After the Heisei era movies comes the Millennium era. The Millennium era starts with Godzilla 2000, released in 1999, and ends with Godzilla Final Wars in 2004. The Millennium era is a bit of a mixed bag. Each movie is sort of its own self-contained thing, aside from two movies that tie into one another. Those two movies being Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. The Millennium movies have some of the best action scenes and suit designs of any of the movies. You also get a wide variety of tone and style. The best of the Millennium series would have to be Godzilla 2000, and also Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, which, yeah, it has a really long name. Most fans just refer to it as GMK for that reason. But it's a really good movie, and I'd say check it out. It's a fan favorite. I also suggest watching the two movies that I mentioned earlier, Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. Overall, the Millennium era is pretty solid and has some of the best practical effects and visuals of any of the movies. Finally, we come to the current era Godzilla movies, the Reiwa era. These movies include both the American Godzilla movies published by Legendary Pictures and the most recent Japanese films. The Reiwa era brings the franchise into the modern day with amazing CGI and special effects. The MonsterVerse films published by Legendary Pictures are probably the most accessible and easiest movies for a new viewer to get into because they're big budget Hollywood movies that will feel familiar to people. The Japanese Reiwa movies include Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One. These movies are both pretty serious films that deal with a lot of heavy stuff like the Fukushima nuclear disaster, government incompetence, and survivor's guilt and PTSD. So if you're looking for a more serious approach to Godzilla movies, then definitely check these two out. The best of the Reiwa movies include Godzilla Minus One, Shin Godzilla, Godzilla 2014, and Godzilla vs. Kong. So that basically sums up my guide to Godzilla. Just as a quick recap, there are 4 eras of the Godzilla movies. The Showa era movies, which are the oldest films and stretch from the 50s all the way through the 70s. They're generally pretty campy and silly, aside from the 1954 original. My top recommendations for the Showa era are Godzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Invasion of Astro Monster, Destroy All Monsters, and Terror of Mechagodzilla. And if you're looking for some extra cheese and weirdness, I'd watch Godzilla vs. Megalon and Godzilla vs. Hedorah. The Heisei era are the movies from the 80s to the 90s, and they're generally a bit flashier and have a bit more edge and seriousness to them. I recommend The Return of Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, and Godzilla vs. Destroya. The Millennium era goes from 1999 to 2004, and the movies range in tone and style between each, but the practical effects and action scenes are top-notch. Check out Godzilla 2000, GMK, and that's the one with the really long name, and the 2 connected movies, Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS. Finally, the Reiwa era. These are the modern movies that include the American MonsterVerse films, and they have modern CGI and spectacle. The MonsterVerse movies are probably a great place to start if you're totally new to the franchise, because they'll be familiar as they're big-budget Hollywood films. The Japanese Reiwa movies are serious in tone and cover difficult topics like PTSD and the failures of government. If you're looking for a Godzilla movie that takes itself seriously, then start here. I'd recommend watching Godzilla 2014, Godzilla vs. Kong, and the 2 Japanese Godzilla movies, Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One. And I think that pretty much covers it. Now you know where to start, and hopefully things seem a little less overwhelming now. Many of these movies can be found on streaming services like Netflix, Max, and Hulu. You can even find some of them on the Internet Archives, and there's other methods out there to finding them that I can't endorse. Lastly, I'd suggest watching all these movies in the original Japanese audio with the English subtitles on. A lot of the bad rap these movies get is actually just due to their terrible dubbing, and watching them with subtitles will just eliminate that as an issue. Unless you want to watch them with maximum camp, then go for it, I guess. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button, and subscribe if you want more content. I'll be making more Godzilla videos in the future, and more videos on other topics too. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.